And Joe, nobody around this table is surprised that Donald Trump continues to do what he is doing on social media, except for the fact that he was told and warned not to by this judge.
Well, and it'll continue. Nobody will be surprised if it continues. Barbara, what should we expect today? And should we expect the court to actually hold Donald Trump accountable?
Well, today, what the Justice Department is asking for is actually far more modest than any sort of gag order. All they're asking is, before we share all of these witness statements in discovery, we would like an order that says Donald Trump cannot disclose that to the public, knowing that that could invite threats or harassment or intimidation. And yet they have dragged their feet. I'll be curious to see what possible defense they have to this, because this is a routine order entered in many, many kinds of cases. And so I think Donald Trump will file something, and I'm confident the judge will enter this order to prevent that disclosure. Now, that is something that falls short of telling him to stop doing what he's doing, which is intimidating witnesses. And that's going to be a harder question because the judge is going to have to decide whether to gag him, which will bring all kinds of cries of foul.
You know, Walter, this is just the latest, and Donald Trump showing not only who he is, but who he wants to be. I think the Biden campaign is going to make this a campaign about democracy versus authoritarianism. Mm-hmm. And Donald Trump's, if you come after me, I'm coming after you, is, again, just the latest in the long line of a guy that's trying to break all norms. And the Republican Party, what's your take on the Republican Party seemingly going along for the ride?
It's amazing to me that this country has split so much. We see, those of us at this table, maybe authoritarianism, and that's the problem. On the other side, it has become a free speech thing. And I don't think some of us realize how strong that feeling is, whether it was what Trump did on January 6th or what Trump did yesterday, has now fallen under that rubric of we have to protect free speech. So it's a banner that, as one side takes up the banner of anti-authoritarian tendencies, the other side has taken up the banner of free speech.
And John Heilemann, you see it all over, whether it's Fox News or the Wall Street Journal editorial page, with editorials and the op-eds. If you talk about the riots on January the 6th, they talk about Hunter Biden. If you talk about stealing nuclear secrets, they talk about Hunter Biden. If you talk about stealing military secrets and war plans, they talk about Hunter Biden. If you talk about an effort to steal, to overturn an American presidential election, they talk about Hunter Biden. It's not very convincing, but they try it anyway. And this First Amendment argument, of course, they know it doesn't hold water. They know that it's a pathetic excuse. All you have to do is read the first page or two of Jack Smith's indictment to know that this is not about free speech. And yet they're so desperate to find some sort of moral or legal equivalency. And what do you make of the fact that so many people are falling for it, and Republicans are just staying mum, is being quiet while Donald Trump talks about going after a federal prosecutor?
I mean, I wish, Joe, I could say it was this point surprising that we're seeing what we're seeing, in the sense that, you know, this is every step we get further down this path, the more that we also, the depth of the grip, the depth of the kind of partisan psychosis that's gripped the Republican Party, just how deep it is, just how tight Trump's hold is over the combination of the base of the Republican Party and then the elected leadership of the Republican Party, which looks at the base and is scared of the base, and therefore goes along essentially with these things that would have been considered unthinkable in the party before the age of Donald Trump. And I mean, each turn of the screw is totally unsurprising, and yet it tightens it to a degree. When you step back from it, you realize, my God, how far this whole thing has gone. I'm almost as much interested, though, in the kind of the immediate political ramifications of the fact that somehow Trump is managing to turn all of this to his advantage in one limited political sense, but a very important political sense, which is It's wall to wall now. We have spent this morning on Morning Joe, and everyone has spent a lot of time talking about these pretrial motions. They would not be given anything like this kind of coverage in any other case. Trump is just going to be, with all of these cases out there, Trump is going to be wall to wall in terms of the coverage. And all you can say is what a small sliver of a chance that people like Mike Pence or Chris Christie or anybody who's running against Donald Trump would have to break through evaporates very quickly when you can't get any airtime on either the right or the left or in the middle of American media. Donald Trump is just, again, and I'm not even saying it's the wrong thing. These are unprecedented stories. We have to cover them. We should cover them. But man, if you were a Republican trying to get some oxygen against Donald Trump, just imagine what it's going to be like over the next 9 months when the Republican nomination fight's playing out. No one's going to get the time of day.
Well, and of course, what is the option? You know, people say, oh, don't talk about Donald Trump. Okay, we won't talk about somebody who tried to overthrow American democracy, tried to overthrow a presidential election, stole nuclear secrets. So all and you bring up a really good point, John. But for those who say, oh, well, let's just not talk about it and hope it goes away, we're talking about a riot and a scheme that Donald Trump launched to try to overturn a presidential election. And Walter, I hear what you're saying about, yes, there are people that you can talk about this being about January the 6th, but they'll say it's about, free speech. But we always, this is what Trump has done. And moral equivalency, between trying to overthrow a presidential election and Hunter Biden, when, of course, they look right past $2 billion from the Saudis with Jared Kushner. They look right past all the other stuff. I'm just wondering, what do you do? You've been in the media business, most of your life. What do you do if you're the editor of a newspaper and you're trying to break through this? Because people can tell you, oh, this is about the First Amendment, Walter, but they know it's not. They know it's not.
Well, first of all, a lot of them don't. In other words, free speech, whether it involves social media, whether it involves this case, used to be something that spanned the spectrum, the ACLU, left and right. And now it has become a rallying banner, and I think we should try to understand it. What John said, of course, as always, has the odious smell of truth, which is that if you're going to focus all the time on Trump, it's going to be hard for anybody to break through. And yet there's no solution to that. It's not like you can take the focus off of this. It's a rubbernecking thing. So the only way to make this work is if some people, like the Chris Christie's, Chris Sununu's, Mike Pence, are able to continue to prosecute the case and say there is no moral equivalence when you're dealing with stuff like this versus Hunter Biden's laptop.
Now, tell me, Walter, how is getting people to Washington, D.C., setting up false electors, having them know that they're false electors, having your attorney admit that you deliberately tried to do exactly what's against the law, which is to stop a constitutional function. Tell me, how's that about the First Amendment?
Well, first of all, don't try to trap me into being the defense attorney.
I'm not trying to trap you into anything. I want to know how is setting up a conspiracy to have false electors and overturn the Constitution of the United States about free speech?
This is why this case is going to be interesting, because as you can see with the Trump defense attorneys and others, what the government has to prove is that Trump absolutely knew in his heart of hearts that he was wrong, that he was lying, and that he was trying to overthrow the government. And the mind of Donald Trump, I've read many books about him, is a very dark forest, and having to prove the intent of knowing he was doing something that was an insurrection act and false is going to be the challenge these prosecutors face.